We're here to discuss what we call the Human Capital Development Nexus, which seeks to combine the indicators from the State Fragility, Human Security, and Human Capital Development into one cohesive system, which allows policymakers to get a good sense of the different components of these issues. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to walk you through it over the next 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll engage with you to answer any questions or explain further. So we'll begin by walking through what the problem is and presenting what we believe the solution is and where we're working. And then we'll give you an overview of the nexus and then lay out the project's objectives and what we seek to achieve. And then we'll walk you through the different potential partners and end users of the system. And then I will also take you through the system architecture that we've designed from the technology point of view. And then also lay out the scopes and considerations that we're going to be working on, that we're keeping at the back of our mind during this process. And then the next thing is also work out the information coordination and exchange mechanisms, because, you know, as you've been following the past since yesterday, that interoperability of the data is a key consideration, and we're factoring that into our system design. We'll give you a quick overview of the potential data sources that we're leveraging for this system, and then provide a brief quick case study on existing early warning systems, and, you know, sort of point out the lessons that we're trying to pick up from each. And then the last thing is what makes us think we will explain why we think we can execute this, because we're consulting with different organizations, which is Africa Human Capital Development Plus, ELVA, and Fund for Peace, working together on this project, and we think that gives us an edge on the different components. And then we'll take any questions and explain further if we need to. Okay. Right.
So, hi everyone, my name is Annalise Bernard. I'm with ELVA Community Engagement. I've had a career of bouncing back and forth between the private and the public sector, really working on West Africa specifically. So I think some of the lessons learned in how specifically the embassies and therefore the state in particular digest information from the field and how that impacts policy decisions on the ground, both in terms of interventions such as USAID funded interventions, but also in terms of security decisions and political decisions. How the siloing of information can negatively impact some of those decisions, and how a system like the one that we'll be discussing can help reinforce and nuance and contextualize the information that gets fed up a pipeline to those who are making the decisions at the end of the day on what is going to happen on the ground. Basically, and I look a lot to the case study I worked on when I spent several years in Niger with the US Embassy there. And you would regularly see how development partners, so in the context of the US government, it's obviously USAID, was not exactly, they were the ones collecting the data on the ground from their programs and their partners. And that information was remaining within one sector of US government, and it wasn't being well circulated across other elements of US government, both the intelligence community, the diplomatic arm, and obviously the security actors. So what ended up happening was you would have security provisions being set up that sometimes would wipe out or unsee or destabilize a development program that was taking place at the same time, because the issues weren't being presented well enough to the people who actually had to make the decision. The siloing of information was ostensibly damaging US foreign policy in these countries and frankly wasting a lot of money. But then on the ground, when it comes to the people who are benefiting, the beneficiaries of these programs, but also the governments that are hosting these beneficiaries, they're also only getting piecemeal information and pipelines that are totally disaggregated and are not feeding into a centralized system. So the goal for what we're trying to do here, and obviously what my partners will then explain a little bit more in detail, is to really kind of address that problem by figuring out a way to ensure that what is taking place with environmental shocks, stressors that are impacting the rainy season, and farming and planting seasons, and then obviously the humanitarian needs on the ground where you have food insecurity, but you also have wash needs, for example, but then also taking stock of potential indicators coming down the pipeline from violence in a neighboring country that might spill over in the next 6 to 12 months, and how that could impact any kind of development program that's trying to target some of the humanitarian needs, and how that will obviously influence the larger policy decisions, but then be also able to turn into a feedback loop that can be broken down and kind of contextualized by the partners that are implementing these partners, and also the populations, in order to be able to express what their needs are. So we decided to take a look at some of the bigger hotspots kind of across the Sahel Belt, which is where the Sahara Desert starts to seed to sub-Saharan Africa, across West Africa, into East Africa. All of these countries over the past several years, honestly, over the past 3 to 5 years, have experienced political uncertainty. Over the past decade, the entire Sahel Belt has experienced some of the worst deforestation and degradation of environmental impacts, coupled with famine and conflict, and pretty dramatic humanitarian indicators in terms of what is taking place with the population, both in terms of human security, but also development indicators. These countries are perfect hotspots to test the idea of how do you merge the nexus of data alongside, like across all these different sectors, to ensure that you get a much more cohesive and holistic view of what is actually taking place and where the needs are. Next slide.
We'll come to that. We just in the next.
We're going to run through this as quickly as possible and open up for questions.
Yeah.
To that end, I'll pass it on to Dr. Roland online. Dr. Roland Clark. I hope that it works.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa. Can you hear me clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So my name is Dr. Roland Clark. I'm the Executive Director for the National Center for the Coordination of Response Mechanism, one of the centers that were piloted 5 years ago, and implementing the early warning infrastructure in Liberia via the sub-region. So we want to look at the project objective, HCD plus vision for the integration of HCD driving data and indicators within existing structure, not in isolation. Existing structure I mean the early warning infrastructure. There are 6 of them we want to look at, and we believe this will help us to meet the SDG goal and achieve the following amongst many other gains. Mitigation of state fragility. 2, comprehensive risks and assessment. 3, data-driven policy and decision-making. 4, support advocacy and awareness. 5, efficient resource allocation. And 6, sustainable resilience. We want to look at potential partners and end users. This is very, very, very key. Can you please change the slide? The one with the map.
Next one.
The next slide. Okay, good, thank you. Look at the end user and potential partner. We should not forget to believe that the list could increase, but for now, what we have, it has to do with government and non-government institutions, fee monitors, and focal points. For government, we have the president, the vice president, and in Francophone countries, we have the prime minister. The list container is also based upon the thematic areas when it comes to fragility and we'll be looking at. What is key and what to take away, how do we get these institutions to respond? So what is very, very, very key is the coordination, getting these institutions to respond to any threat or conflict or violence. The example in Liberia, which I'll conclude with on this slide, we have the statutory board that comprises of both government, non-government institutions, civil society, and now of recent, we are trying to add local government and traditional and religious leaders. When it comes to early warning response, all these institutions are very key. Utilizing the data and utilizing the indicator HCD Plus is very, very permanent that will help improve recommendation to implement response mechanism in areas. So the slide itself speaks for itself, but what is very, very key is the coordination aspect of all these institutions, both government, non-government institutions, civil society, religious leaders, traditional people, local government, HCD focus people, and a regional and field monitor. Let me, from this point, turn over to my colleague to continue the presentation.
Okay, so based on everything we've discussed, now the key question I think you're all wondering is, how do we contextualize this, or what is the tangible way that this is going to be used? So the answer to that question is we're designing and building a system which will allow us to take all the data from multiple sources, which include information from the field monitors, news reports, the HCD Focal Points, State Fragility data sources, human security data sources, as well as the human capital development. These are very complicated and multifaceted indices. And then be able to basically design a pipeline where all that data is fed into the nexus, and then the relationships are able to be established between all these different indications. And of course, this is it's not as easy as I'm making it sound. It's a quite complicated process. But once that's done, what that allows us to do is basically the analysts are able to now, sort of play around with the data in a more, in an easier, more structured and centralized way that gives them a more holistic view of whatever it is they're trying to establish. The goal is to shift away from the, economic analysts looking at just their parochial niche needs without looking at how it affects healthcare or education, or the security analysts, being able to take account of the environmental factors and then how that affects the security and dynamics and so on. So the goal here is the Nexus allows the analysts to look at the holistic picture, not just the niche that they're supposed to look at. The next thing is also the statistical models that the system will employ. These are some are mostly quantitative, but also some qualitative. And then the last bit, which of course, these times we have to keep in mind, is the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to make this process as efficient as possible. These are guided processes. We're not just leaving the machines to do what they want. They'll be supervised by experts. Once the analysis is, I don't say complete because it's an ongoing process, but once that process begins, then we move on to the output in terms of how this information can be consumed or digested. So that's in the form of dashboards and reports in different formats, and also geospatial representation of the data and how the end users can also play around with that information. Now, in terms of how these end users, so these are as Dr. Clark mentioned, the different government agencies, non-government agencies, field monitors and HCD focal points, they'll interact through the system through two main ways. The first one is automated reports that are sent on a periodic basis by the system, because a lot of these analyses will be automated, because even the structured and unstructured data we put in a format which allows the system to say every day or every couple of days or with specific trigger events, send a report to these people. So what that addresses is the problem of having these decision makers have to log into multiple platforms and systems to get different information. Our goal here is to let the information come to them as soon as it's ready. And that we think is a key selling point. The other approach also is that these end users and their analysts and policy advisors can also log into the system to pull out information that they require, that they need. And another key part, which I should have mentioned, is that we're also building in these automated report generators where the people can specify time ranges, locations, factors, and then generate an automated quantitative and qualitative assessment. We've piloted these, but that's so we're not just, it's all not hypothetical. These are things that we're actually working on, which are working well. So that's the key architecture. Now, as I mentioned, this is by no means an easy thing to do. It's quite complicated. And there are several key considerations at the back of our minds, or should I say the front of our minds, while we're working on this. So the first one, of course, we're working on this in the context of an early warning and field data analytics framework, which, in the context of a cloud-based solution, which allows multiple access and collaboration. And as I mentioned, we're integrating human security data, state fragility information, and human capital development indices into one system. And then, of course, making sure that this process is well documented and well structured, as well as providing adequate training to the users, because what we're effectively presenting is a new framework, a new way of thinking. So what we're saying here is that in addition to making sure that we're designing this well, we also need to provide training for the end users to make sure that they take full advantage of the insights and the systems that we're giving them. Another major consideration, of course, is the need for compliance. And this means, in terms of domestic compliance within the regions which will be working, but also international best practice. GDPR is a very good example, and then also domestic data protection legislation in the region, which has taken off over the past few years. We're also working hard to make sure that the system provides localization options, things around language, measurements, and other factors, so that the different users can tweak the system so that it works just for them. We're trying to avoid this top-down approach where, the producer sets the system up on the way and forces it down on the user, but then and giving the user the opportunity to make sure that they can configure the system in a way that works best for them. And of course, the last bit is cybersecurity, because that's key. Now, part of the information, most of the information is mostly going to be open source, but there will be some, especially from the field monitors, there will be some, how do I put it, sensitive information being put in the system, and restricting access and regulating who accesses that and how they plan to use that to avoid any complications or weaponization of the data is going to be key. So the cybersecurity is another key component we're looking at. On the system design side as well, in terms of, as I mentioned, we're using a lot of data analytics and ML tools to make the process of analysis a lot more efficient, a lot of decision-making and predictive models. We're going to make sure it's user-friendly. This requires iterative tests for the end users to get feedback to make sure that we're giving them a good solution. And then, of course, the typical things, easy navigation, ability to filter and, customize information as the user wants. And the last key part, which is arguably probably the most important, is the stakeholder engagement, understanding that what the needs of the end users are, and also making sure that we're meeting those needs by the system. We're not necessarily forcing a solution that's half-hearted or, just partly efficient on them. And that's a key thing now, but it's going to be an ongoing process as we design, develop, deploy, and maintain the system. That stakeholder engagement is going to be a continuous cycle to make sure that we're continuously improving the process.
Go ahead.
Okay, so as I mentioned, information coordination and exchange is a key thing, because as we discussed the past couple of days, interoperability is a key issue now, and also traceability of that process. So things around the collection analysis side, where there's clear audit trails, everything is being documented according to a strict regime in terms of identifying the information sources, data collection protocols, as well as how that data is ingested into the various pipelines, all the way down to how that information is verified and validated by those collecting it. On the analysis side, we're looking at analytical processes, which I said, the clear audit trail in terms of how the data came in and what was done with it and how the output was arrived at. Same thing for the code and analytical tools and visualization platforms as well. And then also accuracy assessments, because another key thing is making sure that what is coming out is accurate. And that's a more post-facto process, but that makes sure that helps us improve the collection analysis cycle. Security, on the security side, we're incorporating things like encryption, obfuscation of private identifiable information, having a rigorous compliance program coupled with regular audits by internal and external auditors to make sure that we're actually complying to domestic and international standards. And then having very clearly defined data retention and data retention protocols as well. Now, in terms of exchanging and sharing, which we think is key, because we're designing the system not that the data is used solely on our platform, but also enabling other platforms to access. So things around API access, secure data repositories, and also data transfer protocols are being factored in there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, continuous improvement, because we know we'll make mistakes, we know we won't get it 100% eventually, and that is at the forefront of our minds. So we're putting in the mechanism to make sure that we have that ongoing improvement cycle from stakeholder engagement, from different partners and donors and so on, to make sure that we're constantly improving these cycles. So that's the slide, please.
So I'm Nate, and I'm the Vice President for Research and Innovation at the Fund for Peace, and we do the Fragile States Index and working with ECOWAS and some other early warning systems across Africa, and particularly West Africa, as well as Nigeria and other places. And so if you're anything like me, you're very, you love data, you love technology, you're also very skeptical, right, about whether something like this, a platform as complex as this, is going to actually be useful on the ground. And so I think for us, especially, in the face of the harsh realities that you see, in places now like Israel and Gaza and Ukraine and, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. You wonder, like, what can we bring that's actually going to be useful on the ground? And we had a big discussion this morning in the main room about this very topic. Nantane talked about how the question of representativeness of the data is so important. She said we don't have enough data, and I heard the gentleman from UNDP say that behind every number is a life. So those two things I think are pretty essential to this whole project that we're working on. When we talk about data, we're talking about knowledge, and there's a lot of knowledge out there. The problem is that knowledge is not integrated or distributed, and so you can't cross-validate it, and you can't derive trends. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to bring the existing knowledge together. And so you see here on the slide, state fragility, human security, and human capital development. Those are the sort of the three sectors that we're trying to bring together, which is unique. Different early warning systems focus on different things. We're trying to bring it together and focus on that nexus between those three things, because they're all three so critical to the success of this exercise and for the promotion of human security and well-being around the world. So you see all these different sources. These sources exist already, and we're going to leverage on the models and the indices and the tools that already exist, and we're going to bring it together into a common space so that it can be analyzed in a way that we can not only cross-validate, but also derive trends, because trends are so critical to prediction, and prediction is critical for planning, because you don't plan for the past, you plan for the future. Next slide. So there are lots of early warning systems out there as well. We've worked on a lot of these ourselves. We've worked in Liberia with Dr. Clark. You see the Liberia Early Warning and Response Network. It's an amazing system that they do over there in Liberia at the Peace Building Office. I think you had ACLED talk yesterday, and they have a great data set that they produce. Nigeria Watch is excellent. All of these are very, very good, right? But what we want to do is we want to be able to link and expand these, to bring them together into a common space, so that we can cross-validate, and then we can also derive trends by filling the gaps, because each of them has strengths and each of them has gaps. So that's what we're trying to do here with this platform that Quay described just now, I'm very excited about this. This is the kind of work that we've been doing, on a smaller scale with various partners, now for the last 10 or 15 years or so at the Fund for Peace. And we're very excited about the opportunity to sort of scale it up and to work with our partners. There's a real demand signal for this, as Dr. Clark talked about from the point of view of the Liberia NCCRM. Of course, there's also ECOWAS. We've worked closely with ECOWAS. They do amazing work over there. EGAD and CWARN. So much great work being done, and we're just so excited about the opportunity to bring all that data together, and to serve them, to help them be more successful in achieving their own missions. And so that's what we're here to do. Next slide. And so I think that I've already covered this. When we talk about fourth generation early warning systems, that just means sort of an integrated process to link the early warning to the early response, by very strategically from the outset, not as an afterthought, not so that you just create a report and hand it off to somebody to respond, but rather to integrate the end users into the process from the very beginning. Next slide. So this kind of shows you who we are and everything that we've been doing around the continent of Africa. I'm really excited about this project and looking forward to your questions.
I think we have at least 7 minutes for. We started a little late.
Okay. I think you had a question which has been burning a hole. Yeah.
No, I just have to one for yourself and one for you, if it's okay. Do you mind going back to the slide on the stacked bar? I just had a question about the wireless solution. I don't know if it's an anomaly or if it's
The case study one, sorry, the case, it's the third or fourth. slide.
Oh, all the way back.
Yeah, all the way.
Oh, this
Yeah,
one?
this one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is the y-axis that supposed to be as it is, the numbers?
Sorry, which numbers are the composite?
On the stacked bar charts.
No, sorry, what you mean?
How do you read on the left, the 100%, 100%, 100%, and then 99?
Oh, no. So what there is the different indices we're supposed to, what we struggle to basically give it a sense that show the consistency of the profile in terms of FSI, HSCI, and HDI indicators. And then, so the stacked bar graph was to give the proportionality across the different countries. But it's more a composite assessment of the indices. Yeah.
And then for your presentation,
Yes.
is there an existing interface for everything you're building?
For part of them, we built one for the security aspect of it. We're now building the different other components, and then the goal is to integrate it after. The security one is fully functional and is working now as we speak.
Am I assuming it's restricted access or?
Well, it is restricted access for now, but we can, get your information and share it with you as soon as it's ready. Yeah.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Fantastic initiative. Really hope to see it succeed. I'm similarly skeptical to Nate with and the reason is for that first session that we had, right? A lot of data is data diplomacy. So how is this going to be different than the state peace building indicators, for example, getting the G7 plus bought in, getting political will to actually use early warning to understand all of these things? What investments are going to be made in data diplomacy to get people to use and understand what this is?
Great question. I don't know if I have the answer to that question. When I think about early warning, I think about it less about trying to produce new information. Like I was always saying, we're trying to bring together existing knowledge. And so it's less about trying to inform people of things that they don't already know so that they'll do things that they won't already do. And more about trying to engage the end users in the process itself so that they will ultimately have, it'll generate more of a consensus around what the priorities are, So that's kind of how I think about it in terms of, you bringing the end users into the process of the data collection and the analysis itself. And in so doing, giving them a stake in the outputs and the outcomes. And hopefully that would also lead to, more of a collaborative and strategic kind of response at multiple levels, from the multilateral to the national to the provincial and to the local. Maybe Annalise can answer that question.
Yeah, I also think that there is a huge demand right now in government in particular. I've been engaging a lot of folks at the State Department, USAID, but also within the Dutch and the German governments as well. And there is a need for this constant reporting and access to information that's still contextualized, but is all in one place. This is asked of us all the time. So I think the goal would be to socialize it and ensure that people start using it a little bit more tactically. When I was at State Department, we would use ACLID data all the time, but this was when ACLID was still kind of the more basic interface. I think it's a lot more sophisticated now. And it was our only source of getting deep reporting of what was going on the ground in terms of conflict reporting. But the nuance and the context for why a certain event would happen was totally lost at the time. Like I said, I think ACLID is a lot more nuanced now than it was then, but it was clear that a desk officer would use this to corroborate their information, but that there was no context for why something came over the border, for example, from another country. And the goal would be to add that context into this. And I think that demand is definitely there in these governments. It's more just about socializing it at this point.
I see a question, from DH. It says, is the system online? The answer, not currently, but we will deploy shortly. So you can check out the HCD Plus. I think it's a hcdplus.org website for regular updates. And when it comes live, you'll be able to access it from there. Yeah.
Is it PLUS?
No,
no, the website, yeah, HCD.
We can share it later.
And then, and then plus.org.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And I know we're running short on time, but maybe one more question.
Yes.
I can ask. I'll let you go. No, please.
No, please.
I insist.
You're gonna win.
Thank you. A very ambitious project and amazing work you guys are doing. My question is really simple, very basic. I think your work is focusing mostly now on Africa as a continent, and respectfully, there's not a great deal of data collection work happening on the ground there in many ways. I mean, whether you are dealing with government agencies or local partners, I mean, it's just for various reasons. That there's scarcity of data available there compared to countries in the global north where if you want to access any data sets here in America, you'll turn to a government agency. They'll just have data is everywhere, and that's why you don't even have accurate here. You don't have because they're just left and right. You'll access this data, visualize it, and they've made it really readily available for everybody to access and utilize it. So in your context, because we are looking at garbage in, garbage out. So if there's no good quality of data coming from that particular part of the world, and you are relying on whether you have partners from the different ministries in a particular countries or local actors, but the data is not representative of truly what is happening on the ground because just nature of life there makes it really hard to collect data. So how is this really going to be able to achieve the kind of results you are looking at or expecting, just given the fact that the data sample you're looking at will be probably small, and then also the quality may not be what you're expecting?
Yeah, I'll take this one very quickly. So well, this is personally, but also I think part of the problem, we're going to challenge that narrative that there's no data because it's actually not true. The fact is, a lot of, as you mentioned, the developing countries have frameworks on how they collect their information. And when you try to apply that in those contexts, then they don't work. But if you look at these, even amidst all the warfare, the wars and conflicts and so on, they have some of the highest growing internet penetration rates, some of the highest mobile phone coverage rates. So what we're saying is that it's not that there's no data, it's just that the way that the developed countries choose to collect their data, it doesn't work in these markets. So the goal is to find out ways of using the existing frameworks and infrastructure to collect the information. You see, not impose the method, but look at the situation on the ground and then collect, because there is a lot of data. It's just that, if you choose to dig for gold with a spoon, you're not going to get much, you see.
If I can add one thing, when you talk about representative data, I think about it in terms of representative over time, space, and by indicator, right? And so there is a lot of data in the global south, a lot of data in Africa, a lot of data in Nigeria in particular. And if you can layer those different data sources over top of each other so that you can fill the gaps, then that would help to alleviate some of the challenges that you're mentioning. It's true that there's certainly challenges that need to be overcome, but as Quay said, I think that there's a bit of a narrative that there's real opportunities now in order that we can take to move forward.
With that, we'll close off. Thank you so much to our presenters.